You're watching Station Zero.
Alright, I spent my entire slow day at work yesterday reading through this sub, so now I want to share my little story. My childhood best friend Marie and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours from our hometown, and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side of the forest was more tall, thick brush. So we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. We hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then, the sound of running footsteps followed. Marie glanced back and suddenly grabbed my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look for myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both stopped to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning off the basement light. We picked up speed as much as we could without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks, and we are in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it, silently, understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point. We're both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climb in and begin to paddle out to the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me there was a man behind us, and that the man started running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up, despite it being the middle of July. He had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away in his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, giving the sounds we heard right before he came running on the path. We reached the center of the lake and stopped paddling. I pulled out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had given me just in case. I hand it to Marie and tell her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me towards the shore and go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing. I turn, and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so bad the whole time as the sun got lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask our parents to come get us then. But it worked out. We got back safe, and we thankfully never saw the man again. America Online was a big thing when I was 13, or in other words, for my generation, AIM, which stood for, you guessed it, AOL Instant Messenger. It was around 2002, and I would have been a fresh 13 and in 8th grade. I had many times went into chat rooms by myself or with friends goofing around. Unfortunately, unsolicited photos were a thing then too, but usually you could steer clear of it by the chat room you entered. I didn't have any photos of myself, and back then you had to take a digital photo and upload it from your camera. Plus, I was 13 and self-conscious, which I'm sure anyone can relate with. But one day, a guy popped up on my screen, wanting to chat. It went fine at first. I was very naive back then, and we quickly fell into a pattern of talking. His name was Dave, and he lived in California. Eventually, he told me he loved me, etc. But the problem was, he was 19. Now, I wasn't proud of this, but at first, At 13, I just sent pictures of some random girl and said it was me. He instantly fell for me, telling me age is just a number and how mature I was. Now, at this point, he did not live in my state, so there was never any chance of us meeting. Eventually, he told me that he and his mom were moving up to a city that was about an hour and a half away from me. He started begging to see me and go to a movie. I had to break the catfishing truth and say those were not pictures of me, but of someone else. He was furious. He'd been looking forward to a different type of girl this whole time. Dave forgave me a few days later, saying, "I still want to meet you because I love you. All the things you say to a young girl to get her to swoon." I think back and I'm like, wow, I was 13. So, I told my best friend everything I just explained above, and that I wanted her to go with me to meet him. There was a whole plan about him driving to see me and going to the movies to finally meet what I thought was going to be the love of my life. I had been brainwashed into believing this was normal. I didn't tell my mom, of course, and honestly, she didn't notice any of it. She's never been too involved, if you catch my drift. So the day my friend and I were going to meet up with Dave, her mom came and picked us up from school. She said something that made my stomach drop into nothingness. She said, "Chrissy, you are not going to the movies. You are not going to meet that man. You are going to get seriously hurt or kidnapped, and I can't allow you guys to go." I cried and cried because I honestly thought I could handle everything and be fine. She told me she wasn't going to tell my mom. I had to promise to never speak to him again and never plan to meet a stranger online. He ended up showing up and was upset I wasn't there. He went on aim, flying off the handle like I hadn't seen at that age. It scared me. It scared me how close I was to this man being near me. I never talked to Dave again, but I easily believe I would have been kidnapped or worse that day if my best friend's mom hadn't stepped in. My mom would have been none the wiser. I was none the wiser. But I'm here today and learned a dire lesson. Nobody is what they seem. And make sure to keep your kids close. This was a vague memory until recently, when I spoke to my dad about a dream I had. He confirmed that this dream was actually something that happened to me when I was younger and filled in some of the hazy details. These details I'm going to share with you now. It was 1995, and I just moved into an upper-class neighborhood in southwest Florida. Compared to my previous neighborhood, full of professional adults and elderly couples, this neighborhood was a haven full of children my age, and even a neighborhood park and community pool. Things started to get weird right from the get-go, my third night there. I heard this weird tapping on my window. Being as my bed was up against the wall where the window was, I was not about to sit up and investigate. The tapping continued for about 20 minutes, but I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I thought maybe it had been a dream, and put it out of my mind for as long as I could. I got ready for school and went to the bus stop, waiting with my sister who was 2 years older. Suddenly, this older man comes up to both of us and starts to talk about how he wishes his daughter was around on the weekday so she could go to school with us and ride the bus. He then offered to drive us to school since the bus seemed to be taking so long. We knew better and politely declined, feeling relieved when the big yellow bus pulled up a few moments later. He seemed disappointed, but still maintained a smile and told us to have a great day. We decided to tell our parents because we thought they would get mad at us for talking to someone we didn't know. That night, the creepiness reached a new level. I heard the same tapping on the window, only now it was more distinct and was getting stronger. I turned over, thinking my blinds would be down, only to realize in horror that they were pulled 3/4 of the way up. I was face to face with the creep from earlier, and he just stared at me, a slight smirk on his face. He told me to unlock the window so I could come outside and play with him and his daughter. Being on the spectrum, I trusted people way too easily, and I thought about how fun it would be. Disregarding the time, I said, "Let me ask my mom." His face turned into this scowl I will never forget, and banged on the window and demanded I open it immediately. At this point, my dad comes into the room and turns on my light. Having heard some of my side of the conversation, he pieced together what was going on and made eye contact with the guy for about 2 seconds before running outside after him. He did not catch up with him, but did call the police. It turns out the man did have a daughter that he lost custody of due to sexually assaulting her. She did not live with him and had not done so in years. I don't remember what he was charged with, but I believe he spent a little time in prison since he was on the registry. So, window creep pedophile, let's not meet again. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues, until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod and he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable and I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd, because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units. I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole, and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Fuck off, or I'm calling the cops." I heard footsteps walk away and heard the building door open, then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called my landlord, who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come to check things out. I called the police and told them what's going on. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother made their way to the parking lot. I watched out of my window and see them approach the tall dude. The tall dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother tried to chase him, but the tall dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall creepy dude from the bar. It was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. I recently got into exploring abandoned places. Most of the time, me and my friends were the only ones there. A few times we ran into skaters, taggers, and the occasional junkie. A few times we had some pretty scary situations. Here are some brief descriptions of my friends. Brad, 6'6" and pretty big. Dean, he likes tagging along with trying to freak me out. Jesse, not talking shit, but dude is a ham planet. With the exception of Jesse, we are all 19. Jesse is 26. My most recent one, me and my friends were checking out this abandoned refinery. The walk up to it was about 1.5 miles and twisted around with lots of trees and bushes on the edges of the path, which is pretty much a bike trail that is paved. Almost every 100 feet, it turns and the bushes make a blind spot. After that, you're in the main area. We had been there a while and it got dark. But before we left, Jesse decides he wants to see the top of the water tower and starts climbing up the stairs on the side. He gets about 50 feet up and decides to turn around. Me, being the asshole I am, decides to run and kick the tank to try and scare him. When I did it, it made a loud booming sound, and then I heard something metal fall off and bang on the cement. Dean immediately yelled, "What the fuck did you just do?" and shouted at Jesse to get his fat ass down before he falls through. As soon as he got down, we fast walked out to the main area on the path, which is when Jesse decides to stop and look at a fucking sign he read earlier. At this point, it's about midnight. Me and Brad are paranoid about mountain lions, and we just want to bail. This is when Dean sees a side path into the trees and bushes and says we should check it out. I tell him to fuck off because I know he's going to try and scare me, and then tell Jesse if he doesn't start walking, we're going to leave him. Dean and I already knew where the path was because we went there earlier that week before finding the refinery. It connects back to the path later down and runs alongside the main path with about 60 feet and some bushes between them. After about 2 minutes of slow walking because of Jesse, I turn around to tell him to hurry. That is when I saw a guy in a hoodie wearing a plain white mask poking out from behind the last corner. I started freaking out, yelling, "Behind us! Behind us! I saw you, fucker!" Looking back, I shouldn't have done that, because when Jesse turned around and pointed the light at where he was, which he did at the most half-assed speed ever, he was gone. The only other person who saw him was Dean, who started freaking out and told Jesse we were leaving him behind. We picked up the pace, and sure enough, Jesse ended up way behind us. We were slow occasionally to keep in sight. We're not assholes. A few minutes of walking, I heard something crunching through leaves and dry grass from the other trail behind the bushes, and it was hauling ass in our direction. At this point, I'm done. I yell "book it" and sprint full speed ahead, while Dean and Brad run back to Jesse, who has the light. I got about a quarter mile up the path when I realized I fucked up. Because now, here I am, looking at the dude in a hoodie and mask standing in the middle of the path and staring me down. So I turned around and run back. When I got there, I see Dean and Brad and Jesse all grouped together, not moving. After telling them about the guy ahead, and deciding there is more than one, we decide we need to stay together and watch every direction. I watched front, Brad left, Dean right, and Jesse behind us. We walked quietly as possible, keeping an ear out for anything. Me and Brad played paintball in the woods a lot, so we knew what to listen for. Every few minutes, we could hear at least 3 people walking around. One was keeping around the corner just out of sight, and the other 2 were on the other side of the bushes and trees on the other path. This kept up until the other path connected back to ours and ended up behind us. Up until that point, I was scared but confident they couldn't get us. If they came from the back, it was one guy, and if the other 2 made a move, we would hear them. But now they were all in it together, and behind us. About 5 minutes later, Jesse blasts through us, running, and I turn around to see 3 guys coming around the last corner, all wearing those plain white masks, all of them holding what looked like metal pipes. So, we all got aboard the nope train to fuck thisville, and started running. We caught up to Jesse, who suddenly learned how to move faster than a snail, and ran the rest of the path back to our cars. Jesse got in his car and peeled out, leaving immediately. Brad and Dean came in my car, which is a piece of shit which half the time won't start. This was one of those times. While I was trying to start my car, Dean and Brad grabbed my crowbar and tire iron and kept an eye on the gate leading to the path. After 4 times, my car finally starts and we got the fuck out of there. As we left, those fuckers just stood on the other side of the gate and watched us. I haven't gone back there yet, but when I do, I'm bringing more people, and each of us is gonna have a weapon.
If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And turn on the bell to be up to date on our latest uploads. And remember, don't change the channel.